Okay. Okay. Let me just stop it.
Welcome to today's webinar, Grow Through Collective Intelligence, hosted in collaboration with ACMP, the Association of Change Management Professionals. My name is Aissatou Keita, and I'm a managing partner at Afrissance. It's a pleasure to join you guys virtually today from Montreal. Donc, je suis très heureuse d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui tout droit de Montréal. So just a bit of a background on Afrissance. We specialize in bridging the gap between strategy and delivering tangible results. Our core services include transformation, strategy and change management, leadership development and coaching, disciplined and agile delivery, capacity and capability building. We are a proud partner of ProSci as well as a PMI authorized training partner. Donc, Afrissance est un cabinet de conseil spécialisé dans le rapprochement entre la stratégie et l'obtention de résultats concrets. Nos principaux services incluent tout ce qui est la transformation, le développement du leadership et du coaching, gestion disciplinée et agile des projets et le renforcement des capacités et des compétences. Nous sommes fiers partenaires de ProSci et aussi nous sommes un partenaire de formation agréé du PMI. Donc, for more details about our services, I strongly invite you, to visit our website at afrissance.com. Nous offrons aussi des services en français, so you're welcome to ask the question and send us a quick email in the language of your choice, either English or French. We'll be more than happy to assist. So while the discussion today will be conducted in English, feel free to ask questions throughout in both English and French using the question box that you see below with the question mark, or the chat box. I'll be monitoring the question and ask them during the Q&A period. There will be a quick section for the Q&A towards the end, about 10 minutes. Feel free to ask any question. We have an amazing expert with us today. They will be more than happy and open to answer your question. So let's jump directly in the discussion. So as many of you know today, our focus is on how leaders can harness synergy through others for lasting impact and innovation. Now let's dive into our topic. What does it mean to grow through collective intelligence? So simply put, I did my little research about making meaningful progress and driving innovation by tapping into the shared knowledge, perspectives, and collaboration of a group of individuals. So today we're privileged to have two incredible experts, Dr. Jeff Wetzler, the author of Ask. If you haven't read it yet or you haven't checked it, go live on Amazon. It is currently the Amazon Best Book of 2024. This book explores how to uncover hidden wisdom in those around us to achieve breakthroughs in leadership and life. We also have Dr. Temitope Richard-Banji, who is a manager of leadership consulting at SRI Executive. His expertise lies in fostering leadership and collaboration for impactful outcomes. So over approximately 45, 47 minutes or so, stay put and ready. They both explore key themes such as the Ask approach, harnessing collective intelligence, the role of curiosity in leadership, the importance of psychological safety, trust when we talk about progress, diversity and synergy, innovation, technology, just to name a few. They will talk about many, many other topics. So through this discussion, our main goal is to inspire fresh perspectives and highlight how collaboration can drive progress, lasting impact, and spark innovation. So without further ado, I'll end it over to Dr. Temitope Richard to get it started. So over to you, Dr. Temi. Is Temi, I think, is having probably difficulties with his camera. Temi, if you're talking, we cannot hear you.
I noticed that he froze. There may be an internet.
He froze for a second.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll give him a pass while we're waiting for him. I hope everyone on the call who has joined us from across the world are doing fantastic. Here in Montreal, it's cold. It's very cold, a very difficult morning. I will say, I think it was snowing during the night. So it's not pleasant. It's not fun. How are you guys in New York, Jeff?
We are good. It's also a little cold here. Not quite as cold as what you have in Montreal, but it's all right. It's all right here.
Oh, I mean, you guys are lucky, I will say. And the people joining from Africa, you guys are even luckier. So while we're waiting for Temi to join back in, why don't you just give us maybe, Jeff, a bit of a background on the Ask and what is the book about, maybe to raise some
Yes,
interest? Yes, please go
I'd
ahead.
be very happy to do that. So the book Ask is really trying to tackle a problem that I believe all leaders have, and all of us have, but very few of us realize that we face. The problem is this: the people around us, our colleagues, the people we manage, our investors, our clients, pretty much everyone holds insights and perspectives and feedback for us and ideas and knowledge that if we could find out, if we could tap into, we would be better off together. We would make better decisions together. We would innovate better together. We would have better relationships. We would save time. But far too often, we never actually find out what those people around us know, think, and feel because they don't tell us. That insight remains in their minds, as opposed to something that we can learn and work from. And so this is a problem that I have observed over and over again all around the world as an advisor to organizations. It's also a problem that I have suffered from myself as a leader many times when I have found out only too late that my team needed something or was struggling with something or had an issue that I didn't know about. And I got obsessed with this question of why don't people tell leaders their most important ideas and insights? I've also been very fortunate in my career to benefit from some incredible experts and teachers and mentors, including someone named Dr. Chris Argyris, who was one of the founders of the field of organizational learning, who developed methodologies on what to do about this problem. And so it's not just a problem that we have to suffer from. There's actually something that we can do about it. And that's what the book is about. It starts really by shining a spotlight on what are the most common things that people in organizations think and feel, but don't tell others around them. Then it delves into what are the barriers, what stops people from doing that. And then the heart of the book is what I call the Ask approach, which is a research-backed, practice-tested set of five steps or 5 methods that can be used to really tap into the insights of other people for better decisions, better innovation, unlocking the collective genius that is around leaders.
Thank you so much for this summary. While still waiting for Dr. Temi to join back in, it's probably an issue with the network or something. I think he's coming back. Oh, no, he disappeared again. So please, Jeff, while you're still at it, let us know. I know you had maybe something you wanted to show, present, you had a visual support. Walk us through the Ask approach and what can someone do to actually implement it and what it looks like in practice, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're a leader and you are yourself dealing with this problem, that there's people around you who know and think and feel things, and if you're a leader, you're definitely dealing with this problem, whether you know it or not. As I said, the Ask approach can really help you uncover what it is that those people around you are thinking and feeling, but not telling you. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment. And here are the 5 steps of the Ask approach. And I'll walk through them one by one. The first one is what I call choose curiosity. And choosing curiosity is a recognition that learning from other people authentically needs to begin with true curiosity that we have. If you try to ask questions and you try to learn, but you're actually not curious, people will see through that and it will not be genuine. On the other hand, if you are truly curious, if you truly want to know, it will radiate an energy that will lead other people to want to share with you. And I talk about curiosity not as a trait that some people have and other people lack, and not as a state of mind that some people are in and other people are not in, but really as a choice. And what that means is it's a decision that is always available to us. And when we choose curiosity, we're essentially entering into any interaction with one single question in our minds. And that question is this: what can I learn from this person? And so if you center this question, what can I learn from this person? What I find and what the research shows is that that will push away other questions. That will push away questions like, why are they such a problem? Why are they such a jerk? Why are they so stupid? How do I get them to do what I want to do? How do I get out of here? Those kinds of questions fade away. And instead, questions like, what do they know that I don't know? What is their experience? What do they see that I don't see? What might I be missing? Those are the kinds of questions that start to come to the front and allow us to really live into that intention of curiosity, of learning from other people. So there's more to say about that, but that's roughly how it begins with choose curiosity. Aisa, too, is there anything you want to focus on that, or should I keep going through the other steps?
Nope. Yes, please, no, continue. It's very interesting. I'm like listening carefully.
Okay,
I'm probably gonna
great.
have more questions as we go.
So the next step is called make it safe. And this is a recognition that even if I'm curious to learn from you, if you don't feel safe telling me your truth, especially if it's a hard truth, I'm not going to learn from you. And so make it safe essentially is about how do we create psychological safety at the interpersonal level. And I think I imagine that many people on this webinar are familiar with the concept of psychological safety, which has been pioneered by Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School. And so this is really about psychological safety at the one-on-one and team level. And making it safe means lowering the barriers for other people to actually tell us their real truth. And there's different ways that we can do that. One way we can do that is the ways in which we create connection. And the most important thing about creating connection is to do it well before you're going to have a difficult or an important interaction. So there's this expression, dig your well before you're thirsty. And that's a really important part of making it safe so that you have that level of connection before you need it. But also the time and place and space of the interaction has a lot to do with making it safe. And so in my research for the book, I interviewed CEOs, and we know that CEOs are notorious for not getting the truth from people. Quite often in organizations, people lie to the CEO because they want to look good, or they want to tell the CEO what they think the CEO wants to hear. And so I said to CEOs, how did you get the truth out of people, especially people who were several layers away from you or more junior than you in the organization? And one of the common themes that they said is it comes down to when and where and how we have the interaction. They said, I will never drag someone into my office and make them sit across the big, intimidating CEO desk from me and assume that they're going to feel safe to tell me the truth. No, I'm going to go and we're going to take a ride along. We're going to have a meal together. We're going to take a walk, whatever it is. And there was no single answer other than I need to go wherever the other person feels most comfortable. And I think for all of us, that can be, even if we're in a virtual environment, that can be what time of day is it? Are we talking on video versus phone versus text? Any number of things. So part of making it safe is when and where and how you create connection. But also part of making it safe is about opening up. If we want the other person to open up, the more we open up first, the safer they're going to feel. The more we show our cards, the more we let them know what is our agenda so that they don't have to guess what our agenda is. And the more vulnerable we can be in opening up ourselves, the safer they're going to feel if they have something vulnerable to share as well. And then the final piece of making it safe is really about what I call radiating resilience, which is expressing and demonstrating to other people that I can handle your truth, that if you tell me something difficult, I'm not going to crumble. I'm not going to get angry at you. I'm not going to punish you, but I can be resilient to what you have to say. So creating connection, opening up, radiating resilience are all really important strategies for making it safe. Let me pause for a minute because I see Dr. Temi is back with us. So we've gone through the first two steps of the ask approach, and I'll just pause for a minute and see if we want to go back and forth.
No worries. Thank you so much. And apologies. I mean, internet's just happened, and I had
It
to
happens.
find my way around it. But yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. And I think still, I'm just gonna take it up from where you stopped in terms of making the environment safe. You said something around, CEOs are notorious for, people don't tell CEOs the truth, right? And I
Yes.
tell you for free that in my engagements with a lot of people at the C-suite level, from a consulting point of view, these are some of the things we actually see where the CEOs, and not even in organizations, even in government, public sector, right? Because I believe we have people in the public sector here as well. The person at the topmost, layer of the organization, does not really get the true picture of what's going on. And you're talking about the culture of making it safe, right? And you mentioned something around creating psychological safety, right?
Yes.
One of the things that we've heard, we've seen, and we also try to deal with is, in as much as we're leaders, and on this conversation, we're encouraging leaders to create, a psychological safe place for people to be able to tell their truth, right? There's another angle to it, which is also coming from a place of fear of retaliation.
Yes.
Right. So how do we, from your, approach, how do you think leaders can address or build a culture where people can actually tell their truth, walk up to the CEO and say, this strategy is not going to work, this approach is not going to work, and also not be scared of retaliation? What do you have to say to that?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most important things for leaders to figure out. What are their truth-seeking mechanisms in organizations? Because the moment that a leader is out of touch with the truth in their organization, it's a very scary and dangerous place for them to be in. It's not a good recipe for the success of the organization. I think so much of it comes down to the one-on-one interactions that people have with leaders. And as you know, organizations very quickly develop stories and myths about what happens when someone talks to the leader. So even if one person has a bad interaction with the leader, all of a sudden everyone in the organization will hear about it. And that will immediately stop them from telling the truth to the leader. But conversely, if one person has a good interaction with a leader, it will also really spread in that way. And so some of the strategies that leaders specifically can use are, number one, I talk about you need to be the learner in chief of your organization. And that means that you need to publicly be letting the organization know how important it is to you to learn. Sometimes that can look like literally saying to individuals or standing up in front of groups and saying, here's what I am uncertain about. Here's what I don't know. Here's what I need to find out. Here's something that I learned that completely changed my mindset about something. It's very rare that leaders will do those kinds of things, but when they do make those moves, they end up really starting to create that environment. Another thing that leaders can do is to, if someone has told them something challenging or something important that might feel scary for other people to say, they can publicly narrate that to the other organization, to others in the organization. So they can actually say, the other day, Temi told me this thing, and I imagine it might have been difficult for him to tell me this. And it also surprised me because I wasn't thinking that. But I just want to tell you how important that was for me to hear that, because now it's making me think X, Y, or Z. That type of thing is another thing. But I would say the most important thing that a leader can do is to ask questions, because people don't know that a leader wants to know something. And I think the default assumption, especially in traditional cultures and especially in hierarchical cultures, is that the leader has the answers. And the leader can be susceptible to that too. They can be thinking to themselves, I could never ask questions because I can't admit that I don't have the answers. But when the leader makes that move of asking a question, it really sends the message to the organization. This leader wants to learn. This leader wants to know. And that is I think that's a very motivating stance for people to have when they see their leader do that. It lets them know that their voice counts, that they matter, that they actually have power in the organization. And of course, if you're a leader, it doesn't mean when you ask a question that you automatically have to do what people tell you to do or their ideas, but it does mean that you're inviting their input, and you can process that input and you can let them know why you are or are not deciding to take their input. Any reactions to that, Temi? Or you're muted.
I absolutely agree with everything you said. You know, it's important for the leaders to champion the culture, right? And that's one of the things we always say. If we're looking at building a great culture, a culture of, you know, psychological safety, it's important for that to start with the leaders. And I like something you said, chief learner of the organization.
The learner in chief.
The learner in chief, you know, that's a very powerful word. Because when people see that the leader is open to learning, willing to learning, then I think people are willing to share, right? And, you know, taking on from where you stopped, you know, something that I'm a bit curious about is, you know, layering on that, the leader should ask the right questions to be able to get the right answers, right? The other part is now looking at the context of what we're talking about. I was thinking about something around listening for innovation, right? How can leaders actually practice active listening, you know, in a way that not just build trust, but also drives actionable insights, you know, in gathering this collective intelligence of their people? Because it's one thing to tell the leader, and this is a very typical example. One of the things that made me dive into leadership, you know, development space is while I was in core HR consulting, there was this thing around a lot of leaders, right? They would say to us then that, you know, when you have a CEO, to the right hand of the CEO should be the CFO, and to the other person should be maybe the chief commercial officers. And in my head, I was like, what of the CHRO? Right? It's the people that are driving the ambition of the organization. And it's critical and important to pay attention to the people. But it's almost as if a lot of leaders do not pay attention or listen to the CHROs as much as they listen to the CFOs, you know. And now it is now becoming very evident that the CHROs are either not speaking up enough or not communicating clearly, or they are not, the leader is not asking the right questions, or the leader is not listening. So how can we encourage leaders to also pay attention to active listening, you know, so they can better understand the context of things and be able to, you know, make a decision? It'll be good to hear your thoughts.
There's so much richness in what you just said. I completely agree that quite often leaders can overlook the people dimensions of what's going on, as represented by the CHRO. I would also argue that the leader should not be delegating people issues only to the CHRO as well, in the sense that every line leader should be a people leader. Whether you're the CFO or the chief marketing officer or the head of product or the head of sales, you've got people in your division. And I think sometimes organizations can make the mistake of thinking, well, if it's a people issue, it belongs to human resources, as opposed to actually we all have to be people leaders in one way or the other. So to me, it's a both and I think both are true. And to come to your points about what questions can they ask and how can they listen, it's a perfect segue because that's really step 3 and step 4 of the ask approach. Step 3 is posing quality questions, and step 4 is listen to learn. So if it's okay, maybe I'll just use that as an opportunity to say a little bit about each of those 2 steps. Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So step 3 is posing quality questions, and I want to draw a distinction between what I call quality questions and crummy questions. And I think many of us go around thinking that we're asking quality questions when we're really asking what I call crummy questions. Even a leader who might be thinking, well, I am asking my people questions. It's not enough just to ask questions. You actually have to ask high quality questions. And I'll give you some examples. Many of us think that just because something has a question mark at the end, that it's really a good question. But so often we ask questions, you know, of the nature, for example, does that make sense? Or wouldn't you agree that? Or isn't that right? Or the kinds of questions that a lawyer might use to lead a witness to admit that they're guilty on the witness stand, or attacking questions. How could you ever think this? Those technically are all questions. And I would think that those are actually the majority of the kinds of questions that actually do get asked in organizations. But I call them crummy questions because they don't really create the possibility that the other person is going to answer honestly and with their full set of knowledge and experience. So I distinguish all of that from what I call quality questions. And my definition of quality questions is simply questions that truly enable us to learn important things from other people. And very few leaders, and in fact, I think very few people get taught what makes for quality questions. And yet we are all in the business of talking with people for our entire living. And so much of what we do is asking and answering questions, yet no one ever teaches us what makes for good questions. And so in this part of the book around posing quality questions, I introduce a taxonomy of different question strategies that can be used to get at different things that you want to learn. Think of it almost like the way that a surgeon has their scalpel and many other tools at the ready. And depending on what they're trying to do, they've got a different tool to use. As leaders and as people who work with leaders, similarly, we can say, here's my question if I want to learn this. Here's my question if I want to learn this. And it's a taxonomy that's just as learnable as anything else. So just to give you one example, and we can go into others if you want, but one of the question strategies in the taxonomy is called request reactions. And this is one of the most overlooked strategies that I think is so important, because requesting reactions simply means, first I'll explain something, or maybe I'll give you some feedback, or maybe I'll ask you to do something. And then requesting reactions is just simply stopping and saying, what is your reaction to that? Or how does that sit with you? How does that strike you? What does that make you think? What might I be missing? Any of those questions are examples of implementing the request reaction strategy. And when we implement that strategy, we now get a chance to understand what is the other person's thinking about our thinking, which means that it gives us the opportunity to invite and seek disconfirming data that might actually help us see something that we weren't thinking of, or spot a gap or a flaw in our logic. And I think many of us make the mistaken assumption that if someone has a reaction, or if someone sees something that we don't see, they'll tell us. But for all the reasons that we just discussed around why there is often a lack of psychological safety, if you're a leader, or frankly, if you're a consultant, or if there's any kind of power dynamic, chances are people are not going to tell you some of the gaps in your own thinking unless you ask them in the right ways. And if you ask them in a crummy way, like you say, so does that make sense? Or wouldn't you agree? Or any of those kinds of things, chances are you're not going to get that disconfirming data. So that's just one of about a dozen examples of quality question strategies that I believe every single leader, every member of an organization should master. And when you master it, you can actually get so much more insight and intelligence from the people around you. So I'll just pause, because that's a little bit about questions. I'll come to your listening, but I want to pause and invite your reaction to that, Temi.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And as you were speaking, one of the things that was coming to my head was when I was practicing to become a leadership assessment, professional. And, we're trained not to just shove things down people's minds. So sometimes when I say some things, when I, look into the psychometric reports of these leaders, and I'm trying to understand, why is this happening? And I share my thoughts, right? Could it be this? Could it be that? Then we were trained to pause for a second and ask the question, what is that sparking for you? Right. So
Yes.
Again, as you were speaking, I was assimilating that and trying to understand, oh, this is really, really important. And what I'm hearing you say now is it's really critical for leaders to champion conversation, right? Listen and practice the deep act of communication.
Yes.
Right? Throwing it back to the person to confirm their understanding, to confirm if you're in alignment with what they say. And I'm also reminded of this particular saying, when passionate employees become silent, right, it can create a sense of, dissolution and, negatively impact the organization and culture. And I think there's a lot of richness in, what you're saying in terms of leaders making sure they practice active listening to the people, confirm the understanding that people really understand. And I think that would create that space where people feel heard. And when they feel like they're actually being heard, then they can actually, express themselves better. So I totally agree with you. And I really hope the leaders, and, participants on this call are also able to take, some of these lessons away as we're having the conversation.
I'll just react. Oh yeah, I was going to add one reaction to what you just said quickly, because it resonated so much that passionate employees are silent. I'll remember that. And I'll take it one step further and just say, if you're a leader of any kind, whether you're a CEO or you're leading a team or you're leading your clients, if you're not regularly hearing critical feedback to yourself, if you're not regularly getting pushes, you should be worried, because people have it. And so if they're not telling it to you, that means you're not finding it out. But back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think I'm also going to take us to another direction in this conversation, which is the place of, again, all of these things that, I'm sharing is also coming from a place of what we are seeing in the consulting field,
yes,
right? In our engagement with leaders. And the angle I'm taking you towards now is from the angle of diversity, right? There's a lot going on around unconscious bias, especially from the place of leaders. Unconscious bias also has really deep negative impact in the culture of the organization, in the dynamics of teams and all of that, where some leaders typically feel like, I would rather work with this person and not work with this person because XYZ, XYZ. Some leaders feel like when there's an issue, because I'm closer to this person, I rather listen to this person and ignore what this person has said, right? And this, diversity could be either from a place of gender, race, and all sorts and all that. How do we address this? What do you think about this?
I think it's present for every single leader and every single human being. I think it would be dishonest for any of us to espouse that we don't have bias or even unconscious bias. And so to me, the question is not, do you have the bias? The question is, are you aware of your bias? And are you reflective about your bias as well? And ultimately, do you start to correct your bias once you are aware of it and reflective about it? And in my own observation and in my own experience, people around a leader are aware of their biases, often even before the leader is aware of them. So if a leader has a bias, the people on their team and in their organization can detect that and pick that up. And people are so hyper attuned to the behavior of leaders that they really can see the bias almost beforehand. And so if you're a leader, I think the fact that other people might know your biases could be an opportunity, because if you actually believe that your goal, that you need to understand and correct for your biases, then all of a sudden the people around you can be a source of insight. And I realize that there are complexities to what I'm saying, and there's nuances, and there's even legal dimensions to what I'm saying. And so you have to put it in context and think about it as well. But when a leader says to their team, what might I be overlooking? That's an opportunity for the team to help fill in what the leader's bias might have simply filtered out. When a leader says, if you were in my shoes, what decisions would you make differently? Which is a question that a leader could say, who's trying to tap into the collective intelligence of the people around them. That's an opportunity for the leader to look in the mirror and to see what their biases might be. When a leader says to their team, how would you handle this situation? And then reflects on, how is that different than how I'm handling that situation? That's another way for them to begin to be reflective about their biases. And so to me, diversity is a beautiful thing, but only if we actually harness the benefits of the diversity. Just having a diverse team or organization that's not actually including the voices of people doesn't matter, and in some ways actually makes things worse. And so in order to actually get these benefits, to your point, we need to be dealing with these biases. And ultimately, if a leader can be then hearing something from their team and saying, you're right, I did overlook that, and thank you for pointing that out, and here's what I'm going to do about it. But also, here's what it makes me think more deeply. It actually makes me wonder if I might be more systematically overlooking X, Y, or Z dimension of something. Then a leader is publicly reflecting on their biases as well. And how rare is that? But when a leader can actually do that, in my experience, it truly invests and motivates the people around them, both in that leader, but also serves as a role model for the people on their teams to do the same thing about their biases too. Because ultimately, one of the greatest levers that a leader has is the modeling of their own behavior. And so if a leader themselves says, here's what I missed, and here's what I'm overlooking, and here's what I think I might have been making the wrong assumption about, and now they have an entire team or organization doing that, then you've really got a learning organization going. How is that related? To what extent is that relating to what you're asking about?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I totally align with, what you've said. And I think I also like the dimension with which you started it, right? We all have biases, right? Whether we like it or not just about leadership. As human beings, we have biases, in our families, as nuclear as it could be, there would always be biases. In our teams, there's always that one person that is, hey, this is my person. I would love to work with this person always. Well, one of the things I'm taking away from what you said, and I hope the participants are also taking away, is the fact that understanding your biases and being able to deal with it, it's really important. I like something I started just posted, let's have an open and safe conversation about this thing. And I think it's really, really powerful to do that. Still on that, one of the things that also comes up, right, when we're talking about this issue around bias and all of that, especially when leaders feel like, I'd rather work with this person and not work with this person, is around, and also linking it to, collective intelligence. Some leaders typically feel like if I am engaging a lot of people or trying to get inputs from people in shaping strategy, am I being over consultative, right? Does that show that I'm not a good decision maker, right? And thirdly, does that not mean my level of independence as a leader is being questioned? Personally, in my opinion, I think it's a bit egoistic to think, your level of independence is being hindered, or you're a bad decision maker, or you're being over consultative, right? I think it's really important to carry people along on the journey. It doesn't mean you have to take everybody's accounts before making a decision, but what are really, really the benefits to the leaders in, this collective intelligence, and not feeling like, their decision-making capabilities is being questioned, or they are being over consultative or less independent. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think you're pointing to a very important dilemma that leaders can feel, which is that they can feel that they have to be, quote, decisive, that they have to be the one who is out in front leading, and that they have to be the ones telling people where we're going and what matters and all that kind of thing. And I actually think that leaders can feel a lot of pressure to behave in that archetype, in that way. And we could have a separate part of the conversation around what can a team do to make a leader feel safe to behave in a different kind of way, because safety goes in both directions. It's not just leaders that make other people feel safe or unsafe. Teams also make leaders feel safe or unsafe. But I do think it's important, to your point, to distinguish between input versus decision-making. It's possible for a leader to still ultimately say, at the end of the day, this decision rests with me. I have to take responsibility for the decision, but that doesn't mean I have to be in my head alone in making that decision. And so you can distinguish between those two things. And when you distinguish that, then you can say, as a leader, you can say, I want to make the very best decision I possibly can make. And of course, how could any single person have all the right inputs to be making that decision? And in particular, if it's a high stakes decision that's going to really affect people all the way out to the front line of the organization, I need to know their own perspective on that. I need to see, where is this decision going to go wrong potentially? I need to see, do they have a different idea or a better idea? And so I would kind of flip it on its head and say, if you're a leader, you actually have to be asking those kinds of questions for people, because there's no possible way that you're going to know what they know or see what they see. And yet you can still say, at the end of the day, the decision rests with me. And so I think both of those two things can be true. All right, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. I think I totally agree, and I understand the angle you're coming from. I'm just being conscious of our time, because I think we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. But there's this very critical one I want to, touch on, which is more or less becoming a global pandemic and something of concern for so many employees and leaders as well. It's a big conversation going on. It's causing a lot of panic in the workspace and all of that, which is the role of technology, right?
Yes.
Especially with the advancements, of AI. So ideally, looking at the future of work, with a lot of research, study, understanding of the future of work, I always say to people that technology is not totally replacing human beings. And that is a misconception people have. They feel like, oh, technology is here, people are going to lose their jobs and all of that. Technology is actually, in the real sense of it, meant to be engaged by human beings to drive, efficiency, to drive collaboration and all of that. But with AI and digital collaboration tools becoming, integral in the workplace today, how do you see technology becoming an hindrance to the ability of, leaders to tap into collective intelligence?
Well, I will say for a few things. One is I totally agree with you that technology will never fully replace human beings. But it can, and it already is replacing many tasks that human beings are doing. And I think it means that to survive and thrive, people are going to have to get better and better at doing what is uniquely human, because everything else technology is going to be able to actually do. I happen to believe that one of the most important uniquely human things that we have is our ability to ask questions, to learn from, and to connect with other human beings as we collaborate and work together. I don't think technology will ever fully replace that. But to your point, technology can actually be a hindrance to that, because technology speeds things up. And when things move faster and faster, we know from research that that is a hindrance to curiosity. When people are moving at warp speed, the brain goes into execution mode as opposed to learning mode. And so the very thing that can be most human can also be the thing that technology makes hardest and hardest to do. But I've also found, interestingly, that if we put it to use in the right ways, technology can actually help us get better at being curious and asking questions and listening to other people. So, for example, in researching the book, I discovered that if you ask AI to help you become more curious, it can do that. So, for example, let's say that you put into your favorite AI chatbot some rant that you have, like, I think my business partner is going in the wrong direction, or my CEO is terrible for X, Y, or Z reason, etc. And then you just simply add the question at the end, what might I be missing? And then you let it go. And what it comes back to you is very humbling. It actually will tell you what you might be missing. It will tell you, here's what you're not thinking about. Here's 3 other angles that you could be thinking about it. And so you can actually use AI in the privacy of your own office or desk or home to invite provocations that will make you more curious. Similarly, you can go one step further and you can say, now, what might be some questions that I could ask her or I could ask him that would help me better learn? And all of a sudden, it'll generate a set of questions for you. And in my experience, they're not all perfect questions, but there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 that I didn't think to ask before. Even with my own wife, there's sometimes it will give me questions that I never thought to ask about something that we might be arguing about. And so you can actually use AI to invite questions. And then last thing I'll just say about it is that you can also use AI to help you listen better. So if you record an interaction on Zoom or you have a transcript and you feed it into AI and you say to AI, what did you hear in this? And specifically, we didn't talk as much about listening, but I say that we need to listen through 3 channels. One is the content. So you can say to AI, what were the main points that you heard them make? One is the emotion. What were the emotions that they were expressing or displaying? And one is action. What actions were they taking in the interaction with me? All of a sudden, you can actually ask it to help you hear many more things than we can typically hear. And it's a great way to train your own listening as well. And so even though the technology can be a hindrance, to your point, if we flip it, I actually think it can help us get better and better at these things.
Awesome. I mean, thank you. I mean, I love the angle you've come from, and I love how you've actually flipped the narrative of, technology being an hindrance, as a lot of people actually will think, to how technology can actually become an enabler,
Yes.
to becoming more curious, to becoming, a better thinker, to ask better questions, to listen better. And I like the part of, what are they saying? What's the emotional side of things? Even helping understand context. Because a lot of times when conversations are going on, people listen to react because they miss out the context, or maybe they miss out the emotions out of it. So I really, really love that. And I hope people are able to take things away from it. I'm going to quickly go into the Q&A section to pick out a few questions. I have a question from Bibi. How do you become a leader that is able to accept all forms of feedback irrespective of who it's coming from? I think that's a very powerful question. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, that's such a deep and important question.
Oh.
And I think it's tied up in the maturation of a leader through experience and through development. But I would say that it's probably, my answer would probably be the same as how do you learn anything as a leader? It's really through experimentation, practice, and feedback. And so what I actually have a chapter in the book about how do you build this muscle as a leader. And what I talk about is that it's really important to start in lower stakes, low risk situations, and literally practice and say, here's 3 questions that I'm going to try asking that I didn't ask before. Sometimes it's even helpful to let people know, hey, I'm trying something new, and I would love your input on how it's going. Take that feedback, reflect on it. And we didn't talk so much about the reflect and reconnect piece, which we can come back to. But if you do that in a low stakes situation, maybe not the most consequential issue, and you start to build your muscles in that, and then you take it to the next step where it's a little more dicey and a little more dicey, you can begin to scaffold your way to making this more and more of a habit. So I don't encourage people to read the book and then take this to your very highest stake situation right away, but start and work your way up. And that can begin to do that. And I think it can begin to do that because it's essentially you start to see the benefits and the rewards of it, both in terms of the information that you get, but I also think in terms of the ways in which people respond to you and react to you as well. You realize people aren't going to think I'm a bad leader for asking questions. People aren't going to think I'm wrong for admitting that I didn't know something. And you actually see, and it turns out that it actually makes them respect you more. And when you get that experience over and over again, and then you can start to take it to the more and more challenging levels, it becomes more natural. That's my experience.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. On that, there are a couple other questions which are more specific to the ask approach, which I think we can ask that as we close out. So I'll skip to a particular interesting question here. It says, this is a great session. Thank you, Ayodele. My question is, why do leaders find it difficult to accept or trust their subordinates' methodology in handling issues that the leaders are not an expert on? And when you intend to take it through, they ignore or shut it down. How can this be addressed without making the leader look disrespected or unintelligent? So I think my understanding of this question is really saying, if, for example, I'm not a finance expert, right, and I have like a financial analyst telling me this is what I think, or a risk analyst, for example, because I know there's always a clash between risk people and almost the rest of the organization, right? And the risk analyst is saying, I think there's a risk here. I think this is not right. But the leader is not a risk expert who is not seeing what the risk person is seeing. How do we get such a leader to listen to that risk person? And how can the risk person also act in a way that he or she does not disrespect the leader or see the leader as unintelligent?
Yeah. And I think that this is coming from multiple angles. If you are the functional expert, how do you better get your leader to listen? But also, if you are the leader, how do you better listen to people who've got expertise that you don't? Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's my understanding as well.
And I think it's such a common thing. And I in my own experience, having been a CEO, I have overlooked things as well. And so I'll start from the perspective of the risk analyst or the functional specialist more broadly, and let's say that you have a perspective that your leader is not hearing. I think one of the common things that happens is that people with functional specialties don't always speak the language of the leader. And so they are presenting it with a technical expertise that's right of their of their methodology or their analysis, without considering the full big picture that the leader might be thinking. And so one of the things that I would encourage people to do would be to actually try to seek the perspective of the leader when you're presenting the information that you're thinking about. And one way to do that is to ask the leader questions. Is to first ask the leader questions to say, what reactions do you have to what I'm presenting? Because maybe what's going on is the leader doesn't fully understand it. Or to even say, what questions does this raise? We talked about earlier how teams can make it safe for a leader to admit they don't know things as well. And so if you're the risk analyst or you're the functional specialist, to be inviting the leader to share their reactions, but also to even ask questions like, what challenges would this pose if we went with this recommendation? What do you see the downsides as? What dilemmas would this bring up for you? Because I think sometimes people with a particular functional specialty can be thinking, I've done my work, I'm an expert, I know my methodology, here's the right answer. But it's only the right answer from the narrow perspective of their functional expertise, as opposed to the leader has to be integrating everything, including the broader context. And I think that people with functional expertise tend to do better when they can actually invite the leader to be saying, here's what I would find challenging about doing that, or here's my concerns about doing that. And then they can be kind of wrestling with things together. If they don't, I think they get very narrowed into the box of, oh, they're only thinking about the financial lens of this, when there's actually a political lens and a people lens and a variety of other lenses. And so the more that a functional leader or an expert can be inviting the leader to be talking about those broader lenses, I think the more that they can come to a good solution that may or may not be the exact thing that they're recommending, but that can still be bringing their expertise into a broader conversation about the business. I think that they will also be treated more as a business partner in that way, as opposed to as just a narrow expert in their particular situation. Let me pause for a second and just let you jump in if you want to react to that.
I mean, absolutely aligned to what you said, and I'm just going to add to what you said, which has been my experience in the past, right? I've been at the end of being the technical subject matter expert, and my leader did not understand what I was trying to do. This was about 4 years ago or something, and I had to speak to a mentor who said to me that don't make it a hard sale for your leader.
Yes.
And that was a very punchy line for me. And I became very curious, saying, what do you mean by don't make it a hard sell? He said, you understand what it should look like. You are the subject matter expert here, right? Your leader is a novice in this area. You also need to learn the act of presenting a business cases.
Yes. Exactly.
And that was something I never thought about. I just feel like you don't understand me. You're trying to frustrate my work. You're trying to frustrate my effort. But when I learned the fact that it is also important for me and for the person who's asked that question, it's important for you to also understand the place of presenting a business case. So if you are the subject matter expert, it's important to put together, even if it's a document or some sort of conversation, to convince the leader to say, this is the why this has to be done this way. These are the benefits of doing it this way, and these are the risks of not doing this way. I think there will be a better conversation, and that would also build, better understanding between yourself and the leader.
Totally. I heard one other layer in that question, which was, how do I make my leader more curious? How do I get my leader to be more open and to be asking questions? And I'll just comment on that briefly, which is part of it is we touched on this idea that safety goes in both directions. And so the more that you can actually be sending the leader the message that they're safe with you, that you're on their team, that if they feel uncertainty, that you're not going to judge them for that, that helps. But there's also some really interesting research that talks about if you want to make someone else more curious and more open to your viewpoint, it turns out that one of the highest leverage things that you can do is to be curious yourself. When researchers had people who are on opposite sides of a very heated political issue talk to one another, they found that the more that person A is open to and even curious about person B's point of view, the more that person B starts to be open and curious about person A's point of view as well. And so there's this very interesting phenomenon that curiosity invites curiosity among other people as well. And so sometimes I think people think, well, if I want to convince the leader, I need to come at them hard or whatever. But actually, the more that you're open to and curious and interested in their perspective, it tends to open them up as well to yours too.
Absolutely. I love that. Curiosity invites curiosity. Punch word. I hope someone is taking that away. The last question we will take before we let Jeff wrap up with the ask approach questions, which I'll just combine them together, is how can the ask model, well, this is also part of the ask model, how can the ask model be effectively applied in cultures where leaders are expected to have all the answers, and collaboration or leveraging the collective intelligence of the team is perceived as a sign of incompetence. I think we've talked about this earlier, right? Where the leaders should not feel like they are incompetent because they are, collaborating. So I would leave you to wrap up with that. But there's a question that just came in from Ife Dayo Tuashe. Taking this to board level, how do you advise the CEO, who definitely has boots on the ground, navigate a complex ego-filled boardroom? Okay, so let me digest this, right? So I think this question is coming from, if we are to take the dynamics of this conversation, right, into board level, right? How do you advise the CEO, who definitely has boots on the ground, to navigate a complex and ego-filled boardroom? So what I'm hearing now is the CEO has to deal with board members who have ego, who probably are not curious, who probably do not listen, who probably do not think that the CEO's opinion matters, who has this shove it down the management approach style. How do you advise such a CEO to handle board dynamics with this?
Whew, that's a big question.
No.
Yes. And there's many lenses we could take to that question, because there's the political lens in terms of how might the CEO understand what are the different sub-coalitions in the board and exert power and all those different kinds of things. There's the process lens, which is, what parts of the conversations do you have whole group versus what parts do you do in committees versus what parts do you do in one-on-one meetings or dinners or lunches. And so I think the CEO needs all of those different kinds of tools in their tool belt. But if I just narrow this in very specifically as it relates to ask, I think one of the interesting things that a CEO could do to flip things on its head would be to, for example, invite questions from the board, invite the board to take a question stance. So, for example, what if a CEO were to say, here's the strategic dilemma that we're facing as an organization? What I'd love to hear from every board member is, what are 2 questions that you have that you would love us to learn more about together so we can get to the right thing? Now you're actually putting the board in the position of posing questions and being curious, and maybe even putting any competitive dynamics that they have to who can come up with the best questions that we have. And to essentially say, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions, and we will come back to what's the right answer. But you're starting to flip it from you tell me what to do as a board member to, we're going to learn together in this situation. And again, that's not the only lever that a CEO would have at their disposal, but that's one I would encourage people to think about.
Great. And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. That is actually a very punchy question.
It's very real.
Just some thoughts around it again. I would go back to the response I gave the other time. And I think this is where they talk about office politics, right? Politics is never a dirty thing, as people always think it is, especially for we Africans, where we think politics is a dirty thing, right? Politics is just really understanding the ability to engage with people, understand what they want, how they want it, when they want it, and being able to deliver on your word. So
yes,
typically from my experience in, board effectiveness programs that has happened, and also helping CEOs navigate board dynamics, one of the things we say is practice diplomacy when it comes to scenarios like this. Before you go into a board meeting, do you want to have had like the one-on-one conversations with the board members to share your thoughts, present your case, get that understanding, get their buy-in. So when you're getting into the board dynamics, when you get into the boardroom, it's almost like you've already done the work behind the scene. Yes. And you are able to seek that synergy in the room. And I think, to be honest, with these questions that we've had today, it looks like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Someone was asking if there was going to be a masterclass, and I think absolutely there's a lot of work that I think has to be done in terms of encouraging CEOs, encouraging leaders, to lead better, right? So as we wrap up, I'm just going to throw the few questions on Ask to you. You can answer them together as one. The first one here is saying the Ask approach is quite enticing. Thank you very much on behalf of Jeff. What success stories have you recorded that is attributed to the use of the approach? So I think if you can take notes, one of them is they want to hear about the success stories of Ask approach. The second one is what's the most important element of the ask approach, right? And how can the ask model, okay, yeah, we've answered that. I think those are the two major questions. How can the ask model help guide CEOs or leaders who are expected to have all the answers, and when they have to seek for collective intelligence, they are being seen as incompetent. So I would leave you to take those three questions in one.
Yeah, great. And I know we only have just a minute left, so I'll try to be very brief about all of this. I've put the image of the ask approach on the screen. In terms of the most important element of it, it's a little bit like a parent who says, which is the most important of my children or whatever, because I really do think that these 5 steps all need to go together. But if I had to go back to one thing, I would say it's curiosity. Because the more a leader is genuinely curious, the more the benefit of the doubt people will give them if they don't ask the perfect question. And the more curiosity they have, the safer it will be to other people. And so if I were to lean hard on one, I would start with choosing curiosity. There is a methodology of coaching that I call curiosity coaching, which is something that I believe is a really powerful thing for CEOs and other executive leaders as well. And so we can talk more about what curiosity coaching is, but it essentially means helping people understand the ways in which their curiosity has unintentionally shut down because of the ways that the human brain so quickly makes meaning and jumps to conclusions based on our pre-existing assumptions. And there's ways to help leaders very quickly notice that and start to inject question marks into their thinking. And when they start to do that, they will inherently begin to make it safer because people will sense that they are genuinely curious about it. In terms of success stories, I will just simply say, because we're at time, the book is filled with stories about how this has been implemented step by step and in totality of the approaches. But the kinds of stories and the kinds of categories of success that comes about have to do with the quality of decisions, the speed of action, the level of innovation that happens, and the strength of relationships or partnerships in organizations. Those are the types of results that I think you'll see if you have a chance to look at the book. There are success stories told about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. And I think you can all follow Jeff on LinkedIn. There's so much to ask him about the ask approach on this page, and I think those are the questions for now. I would hand over back to Aissatou. But yeah, it's been an engaging conversation, Jeff, and I really look forward to us doing more of this and taking it beyond this platform.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your dialogue as well. It's just been fascinating. I loved hearing about your experiences too.
Thank you. All right, over to you, Aissatou.
Thank you so much. We're already towards the end. Actually, it's the end. We're over 2 minutes, but that's fine. It was a lovely conversation. From all the Afrissance team, myself, I would like to thank you both for your time, your collaboration, for sharing your insight. Thank you for this insightful and engaging discussion today. I enjoyed it. Personally, I've learned a lot on the ask approach and what to do as a leader myself going into this field. I will say worked in the public service for a long time, and I love to see the different ways that we can implement what you talked about in terms of the ask approach, asking meaningful questions and so on, and requesting reactions too. That's very, very great. Thank you. I think people love the conversation. I was reading the questions. I got, wow, there are more that we can be doing. Actually, there are more that can be done, and I believe this is an important conversation that we need to keep on going. What's next? I know you talked about the master classes, maybe more webinars to come. So I will invite all the participants today. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for more upcoming events from Afrissance, from ACMP, and etc. Donc, restez à l'affût des prochains webinaires avec nos experts. I invite you all to continue this journey of growth and innovation. Register for our upcoming change management courses with ProSci. Visit our website on afrissance.com. Donc, faites-nous soyez les bienvenus, enregistrez-vous, contactez-nous. Ça nous fera un plaisir de vous répondre rapidement. Again, thank you so much for participating today. For all the participants, happy Thanksgiving, happy Black Friday for those of you that are celebrating. If not, enjoy your wonderful weekend. Merci beaucoup et bon week-end.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Thank you.